My name is Rachel. I am 32 years old, and on my wedding day, the row of chairs marked with the small family sign sat completely and painfully empty. No one from my side walked me down the aisle. No one from my side filled the seats we had carefully set aside. A few hours earlier, my phone had lit up with the final message from my mom, a short, tidy sentence that landed like a slap. "We'll celebrate later, honey. Your brother's Hawaii trip is already booked." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She had genuinely chosen a beach vacation over my wedding. My brother had texted me the week before, laughing about it as if it were insignificant. Vacation can't wait. The flights are non refundable. You get it? I stood there in my dress, listening as the music began, pretending I didn't notice the empty chairs, pretending it didn't matter that my own family had decided sand and cocktails were more important than watching me say my vows. Later, people told me they were sure my family had their reasons, as if there were any valid reason for a mother to miss her daughter's wedding for a discounted flight. The strange part was that everyone assumed I would simply accept it, forgive them, and move on, because that's what I had always done. They believed I would smile through the pain and wait patiently for the vague later celebration my mom kept promising. But months after that day, when the roles reversed and they were suddenly asking me to show up for a major family wedding of their own, I stopped playing the understanding daughter. I smiled and said, "Not this time. And if you think choosing a vacation over your child's wedding is the worst part of this story, wait until you hear how far my family went to defend that decision and what I ultimately did to make them face it." Before all of that, before the empty chairs and the promises to celebrate later, it actually started simply enough. My name is Rachel. I live in Seattle and work as a marketing manager for a New York based tech company, mostly remote, balancing video calls, campaign decks, and nonstop Slack notifications. I met my husband Alex on a dating app 4 years ago. We agreed to meet for coffee at a small neighborhood cafe on a drizzly Saturday, both prepared to leave after 30 minutes if it felt awkward. Instead, we talked until the barista stacked chairs on the tables and told us they were closing. From that moment on, that cafe became the unofficial starting point of my adult life. When Alex proposed, he did it in that same place, sliding the ring across the table between our half-finished lattes on a rainy fall afternoon. It felt natural that our wedding date should fall on the anniversary of that first meeting. A fall weekend, far enough in advance that everyone could plan around it. We booked a small vineyard about 40 minutes outside Seattle, sent in the deposit that made my stomach flutter, and began sending save the dates to coworkers and friends whose calendars fill months ahead with kids' activities, product launches, and limited vacation time. At first, my mom, Karen, seemed thrilled. She cried on FaceTime when I showed her the ring, said she was proud of me, and immediately launched into questions about colors, flowers, and the kind of dress I envisioned. She repeated more than once, I wouldn't miss my only daughter's wedding for anything. My younger brother, Jake, who lives in New York and works in sales, dropped a quick congratulations into the family group chat, along with a few jokes about the open bar and how he planned to take over the dance floor. My dad, Tom, now retired, said he'd always wanted to see Seattle and suggested turning the trip into a small vacation with sightseeing before or after the wedding. For a while, it felt like everyone was aligned. Then, a few weeks after we paid the deposit and began booking vendors, my mom called sounding unusually hesitant, the tone she uses when she's about to make her problem mine. She said she had just realized my wedding date overlapped with Jake's annual trip to Hawaii, the one he always described as his reset and reward for hitting his sales targets. She launched into a long explanation about how hard he works, the late nights, the pressure, the stress of sales, and how this trip was the one thing that kept him going. At first, I assumed she was just venting, so I said something like, "That's unfortunate timing." But she quickly asked, very carefully, if Alex and I could move the wedding. Not by a day, not by adjusting the schedule, but to an entirely different weekend so Jake wouldn't have to change his flights or pay fees. She then moved straight into her familiar list of sacrifices from my childhood. Vacations she skipped, things she gave up to raise us, how she always put her children first and expected us to do the same for each other. The underlying message was clear. A good daughter is flexible when the family needs her to be. I reminded her that changing the date would mean losing money on the vineyard, renegotiating contracts with vendors, and likely forcing many guests to rebook travel they had already arranged. She immediately accused me of being rigid and dramatic. She said a wedding was just one day, while my brother's mental health and rest were long-term concerns. A few minutes after we hung up, Jake texted me directly. He explained that he had found an incredible deal on flights and hotels through an app, that everything was prepaid, and that the change fees would be outrageous. He ended by saying he really needed this break for his sanity and that he knew I'd understand, because I always did. When I didn't give in right away, my mom began bringing it up constantly in calls and messages. Sometimes she was gentle, other times her voice carried a sharp edge. She said that as the sister, I should be more accommodating, that I was choosing one day over my brother's well-being, that weddings can be moved but good ticket prices can't. Meanwhile, I was staring at spreadsheets of coworkers' schedules, vendor timelines, and our budget, realizing we had already built our lives around this date. I told her, calmly and repeatedly, that we were keeping it. That was when her tone changed completely. In the family group chat, she began posting vague comments about people who don't think of others and children who forget everything their parents have done for them. Jake posted an Instagram story about people who think the world revolves around their little events, paired with a screenshot of his flight confirmation. About as subtle as it gets. That was the moment the pattern became impossible to ignore. In my mother's mind, my wedding was optional. My brother's trip to Hawaii was not. The final break came in the most casual way imaginable. A few weeks before the wedding, my phone buzzed with a group text from my mom that read, "Word for word, we'll celebrate later, dear. Jake's trip is set. We'll plan something special just for you when everyone is less busy." A few relatives reacted with heart emojis, clearly not grasping what the message truly meant. I did. My stomach dropped. There was no question, no invitation to discuss it, no apology. It was a statement of priorities. My wedding could be postponed. My brother's discounted Hawaii vacation could not. I called her immediately. She answered, sounding irritated, as if I had interrupted something important. I asked her directly if the text meant she, my dad, and Jake weren't coming to the wedding. She sighed dramatically and said, "Rachel, you know how expensive it is to change flights. Your brother has worked himself to the bone. He needs this. We can have a nice dinner when he gets back. Maybe invite a few relatives. It'll still be special." I told her a dinner afterward wasn't the same as watching her daughter get married. I said, "This is my wedding, Mom. Not a birthday you can celebrate any weekend." She snapped that I was being ungrateful, that I refused to see the bigger picture, that family has to be flexible for one another. When I asked where that flexibility was for me, there was a brief silence. Then she changed the subject and said she didn't want to argue. Later that night, my dad texted me, "I'm sorry, kiddo. I wish the timing had worked out. We'll make it up to you." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, asking if he was really choosing to sit on a beach with Mom and Jake instead of attending his only daughter's wedding. He never responded. I imagined him reading the text, feeling guilty, and setting the phone down, because confronting my mother was harder than disappointing me. In the days leading up to the wedding, my social media feed filled with photos of my family in Hawaii. Jake posted endless shots of hotel pools, ocean views, and elaborate meals, all captioned with comments about family time in paradise and resetting with the people who matter most. In one video, my mom appeared in the background with a flower in her hair, laughing with a drink in her hand. There was no sign that her daughter was about to walk down the aisle on the other side of the ocean. In the family group chat, I saw brief updates about snorkeling, sunsets, and how relaxing everything felt. No one asked about my final wedding preparations. No one even mentioned the date. It was as if my wedding had been erased from the family calendar. On the day itself, the vineyard was beautiful. The sky was clear, the air was cool, and the rows of grapevines framed the ceremony space perfectly. Perfect for family photos, if my family had been there. As I passed the neat row of chairs marked family on my side, my chest tightened. The only person seated there was my Aunt Linda, my mom's older sister, who had flown in quietly without announcing it. She stood when she saw me, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "I'm here for you, not for their nonsense." Behind her, a few local cousins slipped into seats, nervous but determined. The rest of the chairs remained empty. Across the aisle, Alex's family filled every row. His parents had flown in from California, with siblings, cousins, and even two elderly relatives who needed assistance up the small slope but refused to miss it. His mother cried when she saw me in my dress, kissed my cheek, and said she had always hoped to gain a daughter like me. The contrast was almost overwhelming. During the ceremony, I felt the absence to my left like a steady chill. When the officiant asked who was giving me away, Alex's father stepped forward, not because of a symbolic plan, but because there was no one from my side to do it. I glanced briefly at the chairs where my parents should have been. In my mind, I pictured my mother sitting in a beach chair, my brother raising a drink over resort food, and my father choosing not to check the time. Alex must have noticed the change in my expression because he squeezed my hands a little tighter, grounding me. It was his quiet way of saying I wasn't alone, even if my own family had chosen not to be there. After the ceremony, we took photos with his family, with my aunt and cousins, and with friends who had paid their own way just to support us. People asked carefully, "Where are your parents, Rachel?" I replied with the same vague answer each time. Travel issues. I heard myself say it, fully aware that the reality was much harder to explain. Later in the evening, after the toasts, the first dance, and a brief moment in the bathroom where I nearly cried before fixing my makeup and returning with a smile, a staff member from the venue approached me holding an envelope. They said it had arrived by mail that morning. It had my parents' return address. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a small check and a folded note in my mother's neat handwriting. "We hope you understand priorities when you're older. Love, Mom and Dad." That was all. No apology, no regret. Just a reminder that, in her view, choosing a trip over my wedding was a sensible decision I would someday respect. Standing there in my wedding dress, holding that note, I felt something shift. Later that night, I posted a single photo on social media. Alex and me with his parents, all of us laughing under the vineyard's string lights. I captioned it, "Sometimes the family that shows up for you is the one you build yourself." I didn't tag anyone. I didn't mention Hawaii or call anyone out. Within an hour, Jake commented, "Looks fun. Wish schedules had aligned." As if this had been a random conflict rather than a choice he and my mother had defended repeatedly. Reading that, the last bit of doubt disappeared. I stopped framing it as a misunderstanding or a one-time lapse. It was a clear pattern, unfolding in real time. I finally accepted that my mother's idea of family didn't truly include me in the way I had always hoped. For our honeymoon, Alex and I flew to an all-inclusive resort in the Caribbean. Buffets that never closed, frozen drinks that appeared as soon as your glass was empty, and pools that seemed to merge with the ocean. When we arrived, I switched my phone to airplane mode and promised myself 1 week without thinking about empty chairs, guilt-filled messages, or what anyone back east was saying about my wedding. For the first few days, that's exactly what we did. We slept in, ordered room service simply because we could, and drank coffee on the balcony as the sun rose over the water. We went snorkeling, watching fish swarm as the guide tossed bread into the sea. Every few minutes, Alex reached for my hand underwater, as if he could sense how tender everything still felt beneath the surface. At night, lying in bed and listening to the waves, he would say things like, "This is our life now, not theirs." I wanted to believe it was that straightforward. That distance and a ring were enough to create real separation. A few days in, I turned my phone back on to check work messages and make sure nothing urgent had happened. As soon as the notifications loaded, that sense of calm cracked. The family group chat was overflowing. There were dozens of messages from my mother, upset that some relatives had attended my wedding and posted photos. She called it a betrayal of family unity and said she couldn't believe her own sister would choose sides. She implied that anyone who supported me was creating division. Mixed in were screenshots relatives had sent me privately. On Facebook, my mother had posted a long, emotional status about how painful it is when a child refuses to understand sacrifice, how mothers sometimes make difficult choices that ungrateful children won't appreciate until they have children themselves. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew who she meant and which decision she was justifying. My brother joined in as well. He posted a short video addressing the camera, talking about how major life events sometimes overlap, how people have to make tough choices to protect their mental health, and how others refuse to see that and only focus on their own big day. The caption referenced toxic expectations and his decision to stop feeling guilty for taking care of himself. The comments told the rest of the story. A few of his friends supported him, but then my cousin Mike wrote, "You skipped your sister's wedding for a vacation. There's no way to spin that." A small argument followed, with Mike refusing to back down and several relatives liking his comment without adding anything publicly. It was uncomfortable to watch, but clarifying. While I was still scrolling, Alex's phone started buzzing. My mom had decided to go through him instead. She sent long messages describing me as sensitive and dramatic, saying she needed his help to make me see things logically. She wrote that he was the man of the house now, and had a responsibility to encourage forgiveness, warning that holding on to anger would damage our marriage. She framed everything as a scheduling issue, exaggerated by my emotions, leaving out the fact that she had knowingly chosen a vacation over her daughter's wedding. She positioned herself and Jake as the real victims, people being unfairly criticized for prioritizing their mental health. Alex read the messages and asked me what I wanted him to say. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Every instinct I'd learned growing up told me to explain carefully and smooth things over. Instead, I said I was done explaining. Alex replied once, politely but clearly, that everyone had been given the date months ahead of time, that choosing not to attend was their decision, and that continuing the argument wouldn't change what had happened. He said that for our own peace, we weren't going to keep revisiting it. After that, my mom shifted her approach, saying she only wanted to protect the family and didn't want this to tear us apart, adding that he'd understand her point of view better once he had children. It was the same message she'd used with me, just redirected. Around the same time, my dad sent me a separate text. "I'm sorry things got so heated. I hate seeing the family like this. Maybe we can talk when you get back." It sounded apologetic on the surface, but it lacked substance. No acknowledgement of what they'd done, no responsibility, no sign he was willing to stand up to my mother. It felt like an emotional shrug. Sitting on the edge of the resort bed, the air conditioner humming and the ocean muted behind the glass door, I realized I didn't feel the sharp anger I expected. Instead, I felt something heavier, a deep exhaustion. It was like watching the same pattern play out yet again, just with different circumstances. They hurt me in a way that was undeniable, then immediately rewrote the narrative so they were the ones under attack, and then turned to me to repair it, smooth it over, and keep the peace. Even during my honeymoon, they still expected me to handle the emotional cleanup. I muted the family chat, turned off social media notifications, and placed my phone face down on the nightstand. Alex and I went to the pool, and I tried to let the sunlight and warm water ease the weight I'd been carrying. That evening, sitting on the balcony with a drink in my hand as the sky shifted from blue to deep purple, I realized that for the first time, I wasn't just hurt by what they had done. I was starting to question why I kept stepping back into the role they had assigned me, the good daughter who absorbed every slight and labeled it love. The idea that I didn't have to keep playing that part for the rest of my life slipped quietly into my thoughts and stayed there, small but steady. A few months after the honeymoon, things grew quiet. My mom stopped posting vague messages. The family chat slowed, and for a while I focused on work, my marriage, and building a life that didn't revolve around my mother's approval. Then, one afternoon, something felt off. My mom began liking my older photos on social media, not recent ones, but pictures from college, childhood shots of me and Jake, and even a few from our engagement shoot she had previously ignored. She left gentle comments like, "Such a beautiful memory," and my stomach tightened in a familiar way. Alex glanced at my phone and said, "They want something." He was right. A week later, an ivory envelope arrived in our mailbox with my parents' return address. Inside was a formal wedding invitation announcing Jake's marriage to Sophia at a Florida resort. It was a full weekend event: welcome dinner, beach ceremony, farewell brunch. At the bottom, in my mother's handwriting, someone had added, "It would mean so much to the family if you and Alex could be there." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of my wedding, just the expectation that I would show up now that it was their celebration. Not long after, my mom called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. She sounded overly cheerful, like she was selling something. She talked about how happy she was for Jake, how lovely Sophia was, and how this could be a fresh start. She used phrases like new beginnings and family healing, repeating that she didn't want to dwell on the past. When I asked if she meant the part where she skipped my wedding, she paused, then said, "We all made mistakes, but this is bigger than one day." She kept repeating the same line. Family has to show up for each other, as if she hadn't proven otherwise. After that, Jake texted me, acting as if nothing serious had happened. He wrote that he hoped Alex and I could make it and that it was time to move on. He framed it like a minor disagreement instead of a deliberate choice. He said he didn't want tension between us and that it would mean a lot to have his only sister there. For a moment, the old version of me stirred, the one who always folded, who wondered if I was overreacting. But then, I remembered standing in my dress beside empty chairs, the check with the note about priorities, and my family celebrating in Hawaii while I said my vows without them. When my mom called again, she increased the pressure. She said my hesitation was stressing everyone out, that my absence would embarrass the family, that people would ask why their only child wasn't there. She framed it as my responsibility to shield them from uncomfortable questions. Finally, she said, "This is your chance to prove you care more about family than grudges." Something settled inside me, a calm I hadn't felt before. I told her evenly that I wouldn't be attending. She reacted immediately, accusing me of hurting my brother and trying to punish them. I let her speak, then said, "The last family wedding, my day mattered less than your vacation. You said we'd celebrate later, and we never did. Now you're asking me to rearrange my life for his wedding." I told her no. This time, my schedule couldn't wait. There was a long silence. Then she snapped that I was being petty and immature. Jake texted again, less friendly, calling me childish and telling me to grow up. I didn't argue. I replied simply, "I hope your wedding is everything you want. We won't be there." After that, Alex suggested we do something for ourselves that weekend. Not as revenge, but to reclaim the time. We booked a ski trip to Colorado for the exact dates of Jake's wedding, using one of those travel apps my brother liked so much. When relatives asked if we were going to Florida, I answered calmly that we were going skiing. Some looked surprised, others nodded as if they understood more than they said. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, my mom complained in the family chat that I was choosing a vacation over my brother's big day, missing the irony entirely. Jake posted about walking down the aisle without his sister, framing it as abandonment. This time, I didn't respond. I packed my suitcase, held Alex's hand on the flight to Colorado, and felt, for the first time in a long while, that I was treating my own life as something worth showing up for. On the day of Jake's wedding, Alex and I were halfway up a mountain, riding a ski lift with sunlight reflecting off the snow so brightly it hurt my eyes. My phone buzzed a few times, but I ignored it. Later, over hot chocolate at the lodge, I checked. My notifications were full of wedding photos: Jake under an arch on the beach, Sophia in a sparkling dress, my parents perfectly coordinated. In one group photo, there was an empty space beside my mom. A cousin messaged me privately. "They're telling people you couldn't come because of work, but everyone remembers Hawaii." I scrolled briefly, then put my phone away. I didn't feel angry, just detached, like I was watching strangers. Over the following months, deals filtered back through relatives. The perfect weekend hadn't been so perfect. Jake and Sophia argued about money before and after the wedding. They had stretched their budget to impress people: resorts, open bars, extras, much of it on credit and loans my parents co-signed. Not long after, arguments about spending became arguments about everything. Jake kept chasing trips and purchases. Sophia wanted stability, savings, maybe children someday. Instead, she watched him burn out at work, complain constantly, and miss expectations. His performance slipped. Warnings followed. A cousin mentioned he'd taken questionable time off right after the wedding to extend another trip. Within a year, the marriage ended in a messy separation. Sophia left, telling people she wanted a partner, not someone who expected his mother to rescue him. Jake lost his job soon after, officially performance related, though everyone knew his reputation didn't help. Buried in debt and without steady income, he moved back in with my parents. My mom called it a temporary reset, explaining to relatives how hard things were for him. But people remembered Hawaii. They remembered Florida. They remembered how she defended every choice and reframed consequences as unfairness. Gradually, invitations to extended family gatherings slowed, including hers. Group chats split. When she posted about loyalty and betrayal, the comments were mostly quiet. Meanwhile, my life moved forward. Work thrived. A campaign exceeded expectations, and my boss recommended me for a promotion. At home, Alex and I talked seriously about starting a family. I thought about the environment I wanted for a child, and my parents' dynamic didn't belong in that picture. When I learned I was pregnant, I told Alex first, then close friends and the relatives who had supported me. I didn't tell my parents. It wasn't impulsive. It was protective. Every time I let them back in without limits, I paid for it. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for keeping something precious to myself. When our daughter Lily was born, the room felt full, even without my side of the family. Alex cried more than the baby. I laughed and cried with him and felt something close to peace. We shared photos with the people who had shown up for us. I didn't send anything to my parents. I knew my mother would center herself and turn Lily into another tool for guilt. Quietly, without announcements, I blocked my mom and Jake everywhere. No more group chats, no more vague posts, no more late-night demands. I kept my number, but stopped replying. Months later, my dad emailed after hearing about Lily. He said he was happy and hoped to meet his granddaughter. He didn't mention missing my wedding or his silence. I replied once, thanking him and saying that any real relationship would have to start with acknowledging what actually happened. He never wrote back. Through my aunt, Linda, and cousin Mike, I heard things weren't improving. Jake bounced between short-term jobs, blaming everything but himself. The debt lingered. My mom complained that I was using Lily to punish her. Fewer people listened. Many relatives had children of their own and didn't want that pattern near their families. My life narrowed in the best way. Early mornings, late-night emails while Lily slept on my chest, weekend walks with a stroller and coffee. I joined a local moms group, started hiking again, and wrote short posts about boundaries and breaking unhealthy patterns. Sometimes I looked at Lily and thought, if I let my mother in unchanged, my daughter would learn that guilt and manipulation equal love. I refused to pass that on, so I held my boundary. No confrontations, just a consistent no. They chose a vacation over my wedding. They chose appearances over accountability. I chose my child, my marriage, and my sanity. As the noise faded, the shame I'd carried for years grew lighter. The people who mattered showed up. One afternoon, while Lily napped and Alex worked at the table, I realized I no longer felt like the girl begging to be valued. I felt like an adult who had stepped out of a role that was never hers. People say family is everything. They don't always say that protecting your peace and your children sometimes means stepping back from people who share your name. If someone can skip your wedding for a trip and then demand front row access to your life, you're allowed to say no. I didn't destroy a family. I stopped letting a broken version of family destroy me. And if you've ever been pressured to accept less than basic respect because of blood, you're allowed to choose yourself.